Hey Dale, thanks for having me on. Who do I think are the most underrated bass players today that I can think of? Well, two come to mind. I mean, there's so many great players around the world that just do otherworldly things with technique. They're just, all over the place, just great. There's so many people, but when I really tend to think of maybe who's really underrated as far as musical terms, I think of a guy based out of Berkeley, California. His name is Kai Eckhart. The guy is just so musical, and yeah, I remember seeing him around Berkeley, and he just all different. He just plays with so much feeling, and it's just kind of, man. Definitely check him out. He does all sorts of great things, and all sorts of different types of music. Another guy I can think of was Joe Osborne. He was a studio guy in Los Angeles and in the 60s and 70s, and I think he went to Nashville after that. Guy was just amazing. He played on so many hits that were on the radio, and just reading these crazy charts, and he's just I mean, you can't argue with that. It's just, check him out too, Joe Osborne. Those are probably the two guys that come to mind, although there's just so many great players and that we've never heard of before that are just so awesome all over the world. Just crazy. It's just it's like overload. But those two really come to mind the most right at the moment. So anyway, thanks for having me on, and I'll talk to you later.
Hey, this is Luis Espaillat coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. As far as who I think is the most underrated bass player, man, that is a tough one. Man, I think bass players as a whole are underrated because most people don't know who played bass on what, let alone sometimes what a bass even is. So I guess I can't say Dale Titus, can I? I do want to give a shout out to Matt Bissonette as being an underrated bass player because there is a guy who I've seen in very different situations and just kills it every time and is so versatile. His musicianship is bar none, and his tone is, wow, just quality. But one guy I was thinking about who should be name checked a lot, kind of like James Jamerson. Even at this point, Jamerson is not underrated because we all seem to know how great he was. But much like Jamerson worked at Hitsville, USA with the Funk Brothers, the one guy I was thinking about was the great Tommy Cogbill, who worked at American Sound Studio in Memphis a lot with a group of players there. Unfortunately, American Sound Studios is no longer there to visit. It's been demolished, and I think it's now like a Family Dollar, so unfortunately you can't go see it. But man, as far as a player goes and his many hits and his memorable bass lines that guy's played on, I mean, Dusty Springfield, Son of a Preacher Man, a bunch of Aretha Franklin hits, including Chain of Fools, Respect, Think, Wilson Pickett, Mustang Sally, Funky Broadway, Elvis Presley, In the Ghetto, Kentucky Rain, and even his work not only as a great bass player, but as a producer on things like Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond, Angel of the Morning by Merle Rush and the Turnabouts. I mean, it's incredible. One other of my favorite bass lines he didn't produce this one, but he played on it, which I thought was great, is this one. Memphis Soul Stew by King Curtis. And that's just scratching the surface, man. I mean, go look him up. I'm really surprised at how many bass players that I know don't even know who Tommy Cogbill is. And a lot of you guys that do know him, I'm sure, love him and love what he did. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but his music lives on, and he's amazing. So there's my take on that, but there's so many more. Thanks, Dale.
What's happening, everything bass? How you guys doing? Down here in Los Angeles, about 100 degrees out here in Woodland Hills. And talking to you guys about our personal most underrated bass player that we think is out there. And for me, that is a lady named Michelle Ende Gaiacello. She was brought to my attention in the mid-90s. I think she put out her first records in like 95, 96. The first record I got turned on to was the second one she did, was Peace Beyond Passion, and it just was fully groovy and just all this kind of really stick in your face bass. And it prompted me to check out her first record, which was Plantation Lullabies. And just, wow, I just couldn't put it away. That thing stayed in my CD player for forever. Listening to it at home, listening to it in the car. by 1999, she actually has her biggest hit, and she does a duet with John Mellencamp. I think he dropped the name Cougar by then. And they had covered a Van Morrison song called Wild Nights, and she just had this great little bass line in there with playing, you slide up to the six, and it was, it just was head turning. But to me, I brought her name up around some younger players, and they hadn't heard of her, and when they go check her out and pull her up on YouTube, they're like, oh wow, I really got to dig into this person. So if you look her up on Wikipedia, man, her career is quite impressive. She's recorded with Madonna and the Rolling Stones. She's actually a songwriter, a vocalist, a rapper. She does keys. She's also a drummer, and just deep with talent. But check Michelle Ndegeocello out. I know that she's not a household name. Probably a lot of bass players who've been playing for a while know who she is, but that's my vote for most underrated bassist, Michelle Ndegeocello. Take care. We'll see you next week.
Hello again. This is a really fun question to answer. I agree with Lee Sklar. If I had to pick just one type of music to play, it would be gut bucket blues and rock and roll. I enjoy that more than any other genre. And because of the nature of this question, I'm going to go to an old school rock band's bass player. Ram Jam is primarily known for their cover of Black Betty, but the band itself is criminally underrated. They had so many great hits and were so tight as a group. How they didn't make it in terms of worldwide recognition and rock star legends is a mystery. But Howard Arthur Blovolt, if I'm mispronouncing his name, I apologize. But what he did as the bass player in that band was impossible by the standard of the day in which he played. If any of you have not heard Ram Jam's song High Steppin', I encourage you greatly to just listen to it and then try to play along with the syncopation and how everyone in the band is working so tightly together to pull that song off. But Howard did just amazing work, and I would easily consider him a genuine bass guitarist. He played the bass like a guitar in the best possible way. So if I can turn anyone on to the band Ram Jam and to Howard's playing, I consider him to be the most underrated bass player, which is a humorous concept, because if you're a bass player, you're going to be underrated. Thanks, Dale. Look forward to next week's question.
Oh, hey, sorry, you caught me while I was reading. I was actually just reading this cool book, Bass Players to Know, Learning from the Greats, by Ryan Madora. And the great thing about this book is it features a lot of really awesome, probably underrated bass players. And one of the most underrated bass players in my book, literally, is Bernard Edwards. Now, Bernard Edwards was the bass player in Chic, so he did a lot of work with Nile Rodgers, both in that band, producing for other bands, and he's played on records by David Bowie, Madonna. He's had solo projects, but he's also the bass player that played Good Times. That bass line not only inspired the entire genre of hip-hop, but was such an amazing funk classic that also inspired Another One Bites the Dust by Queen, and is just like one of the quintessential bass lines that you have to know if you're a bass player. He doesn't necessarily get a whole lot of love in the press, but he is just someone that is phenomenal and has really cool, catchy bass parts, some of which are slaps, some of which aren't, but funk bass playing at its best. So again, in my book, the most underrated bass player is Bernard Edwards. Bye.
Most underrated bass player. Well, there's about 1 million of them, so I'll kind of stay in my lane and go with rock and metal. And I'd have to go with Bob Daisley. Obviously, his biggest works being the first couple Ozzy albums. The playing was incredible. You know, he would do flowing melodic lines like Tonight. I mean, he did Crazy Train. Who doesn't know that intro? Songs like I Don't Know, where he's soloing all over and everything. Just fantastic. He wrote lyrics. He wrote the songs. And then his work in Rainbow, Uriah Heep. I mean, just a phenomenal bass player that spans, you know, decades of kind of music shaping rock and metal. And I just don't hear him talked about that much. And it's kind of a shame that even some of the style pieces and types of bass lines that he put into stuff, I still hear modern rock and metal players that aren't using and aren't being influenced by. And they're, as far as I'm concerned, staples in rock and metal. So I'd have to say Bob Daisley deserves a lot better than he's gotten so far. So more Bob.
Another great question, Dale. Most of them we don't know about, never heard of, and are playing somewhere and sounding amazing. But I'll bring up two names, the first of which, John Paul Jones, from a phenomenal band, of course, Led Zeppelin. But if you've ever had the pleasure and challenge of learning one of his bass lines from one of the classic Zeppelin tunes, you know how sophisticated and challenging they are. Just great playing. The other name, Dee Murray from Elton John, a bunch of the classic Elton John recordings. Again, phenomenal bass playing, and a guy who never got a lot of recognition because Elton was so big, and more or less Dee was kind of a sideman in some sense. So, yeah, John Paul Jones and Dee Murray, two underrated great bass players. Check them out.
For me, one of the most underrated bass players is Tyrone Porter, the bass player from Doobie Brothers. He played on the second album, and I think he played for the next 10 albums, 11, 12 albums, I'm not sure. But, you know, growing up, as I grew up in Northern California in the 80s playing top 40, we, because Doobie Brothers are so popular, we ended up playing a lot of Doobie Brothers songs. And that's when I really discovered how much of amazing genius this guy is. And when you like listen to like some of the string skipping and some of the melodic phrasing he does, and he plays with a pick, it just makes it even more amazing. He was influential to me because I used to be a finger style snob. I thought pick playing on bass was horrible, and when I realized that what he was doing with pick, it just changed me, and I realized, wow, this is great. And I started also playing with pick. Yeah, man, transcribe some of his songs and you'll feel like, or doing transcribe, just learn a couple of his songs and play along. And you'll find there's so much there. And I don't think he gets the credit. He does. If you look at the contemporaries and the bass playing he's doing at the time and the other people out doing that, he was neck and neck with a lot of the guys that get a lot more credit. And I just love his music. If you're new to you've never really checked out the Doobie Brothers, check out Greatest Hits 1 and Greatest Hits 2. That'll give you a great width and breadth of the amazing Mr. Porter. And man, what a great player. What an inspiration. And I believe he deserves a lot more credit than he gets.
Hey Dale, what's good? I am not in my car for a change. You know, I just recorded a brilliant answer and then I looked at the phone and realized that I hadn't pressed record. So the answer is still the same. It's just not as good as the last time. I think one of the most underrated bass players would have to be John Taylor from Duran Duran. You know, I played in a tribute band. I subbed for a tribute band called, wait for it, Duran Duran Duran. And learning some of those lines, man, John is more than a pretty face. I mean, the dude could really play. There's some really tasty bass stuff in the Duran Duran catalog. So my answer for this week's question, who do you think is the most underrated bass player? I say John Taylor, Duran Duran.
One of the most underrated bassists I've come across in my short career is a guy named Brad Russell. And he's in New York now. And I first heard of Brad back in the late 80s. And I kept hearing his name, and he was associated with a soloistic style of bass playing, and he was doing all these records for Mike Varney out in Nevada, California, for the shred farm Mike used to have out there, Prairie Sun. That was the name of it, Mooka and the gang. And anyway, I finally saw Brad a video of him doing Chick Corea Spain two-handed tapping, and I was just like, who is this cat? This is this amazing stuff. So fast forward some years later, and again, I just kept hearing this guy's name, and I was lucky enough to find him on Facebook, and I saw him doing these videos where he was playing like Jeff Beck, Steve Vai, Joe Satriani type of stuff, but on bass. And I was like, man, this guy's just amazingly creative. So he actually plays upright as well, which I did not know. And it's a new passion of mine, so I began taking some upright lessons with him. And just to see this guy, he can play anything. And I've never quite seen a bassist as versatile.
Hey, how's it going? Denson Angulo here. One of my most favorite bass players, maybe not necessarily underrated, just not as well known to the general public of people who consume bass music. Not really sure how to say that. Is Gary Willis. And this is his signature model. This is a first gen signature model Ibanez Gary Willis bass. And I love his playing so much. He is a huge influence, especially on my fretless playing. And I've been lucky enough to actually study with him over the years. And he's just so fantastic. Such a great dude, super nice, super funny, extremely, extremely wicked talented. And I feel like the guy deserves a pile of Grammys. You know, he's so good. So if you are a bass player watching this and you don't know who Gary Willis is, go find out and let your mind be melted.